He was 18 years old when he left the only home he'd ever known, and all they gave him was a single envelope that felt too light to hold a future. What he found inside wasn't just a letter about some land he'd never heard of. It was a map back to a life that had been stolen from him. If you've ever felt like you were starting from nothing, I want you to stick around for this. Hit that subscribe button because this channel is for people who know what it's like to have to build a life from the ground up, with nothing but grit and a story nobody else believes. The day I turned 18 was the day I legally ceased to exist, at least as far as the state was concerned. For 10 years I had been a ward, a case file, a number on a series of forms. I was Leo, file number 734, and on a cold, gray Tuesday morning in October, I became just Leo. The gate of the Blackwood Children's Home buzzed open, a harsh, metallic sound that had been the soundtrack to my entire remembered life, and I was expected to walk through it. One way. Mrs. Gable, the home's director, had a face made of tired lines and forced smiles. She'd been there as long as I had, a permanent fixture of the institutional beige walls and the smell of industrial cleaner. She sat across from me in her small, cluttered office, the final checkpoint before my supposed freedom. On her desk was my entire life packed into a single worn cardboard box. A few changes of clothes, a dog-eared copy of a fantasy novel I'd read 100 times, and a small, smooth stone I'd found in the yard years ago and kept for no reason other than it was mine. "Well, Leo," she said, folding her hands on the desk, her voice attempting a warmth it couldn't quite achieve. "This is it, the big day." I just nodded. My throat felt tight, a knot of something that wasn't quite sadness and wasn't quite fear, but a hollow mixture of both. Freedom was supposed to feel light. Expansive, this just felt like falling. "You have your bus ticket to the city," she continued, pushing a thin paper ticket across the desk. "And the transitional housing stipend. It's not much, but it'll cover the first month's deposit at the shelter. You'll need to find work immediately. The social worker, Mr. Evans, will meet you at the bus station. Don't be late." It was a script she'd recited dozens of times to dozens of kids just like me. A pre-packaged, one-size-fits-all launch into a world that didn't know we existed and didn't particularly care. We were given just enough to not die on the street corner right outside their gates, a gesture that was more about liability than compassion. I reached for the box, my knuckles brushing against the cheap wood of her desk. "Is that everything?" I asked, my voice raspy. Her eyes flickered to a drawer in her desk. For a moment, I thought she was going to pull out some last-minute paperwork, another form for me to sign that absolved them of my future. Instead, she hesitated. "There is one other thing," she said slowly, as if unsure of the protocol. She opened the drawer and pulled out a simple white business envelope. It was thin, almost weightless, and my name was written on the front in a spidery, unfamiliar cursive. "This came for you years ago, on your 8th birthday, right after you arrived here. It was addressed to be given to you on your 18th. I stared at it. In all my time at Blackwood, I had never received a single piece of mail. Birthdays and holidays came and went in a blur of mandatory group activities and cheap sheet cake celebrations. The idea that someone, somewhere, had thought of me a decade in advance felt impossible. "Who is it from?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "There's no return address, Mrs. Gable said, her tone clipped and professional again, as if she'd allowed too much emotion to seep through. "The postmark is from a town called Havenwood, up north. Never heard of it. The instructions were very clear. Hold until your legal emancipation. We've kept it in your file ever since." I took the envelope from her. The paper was old, softened at the edges, and felt fragile in my hands. My name, Leo Vance, looked alien in that elegant script. It was a name I knew was mine, but it had never felt like it belonged to me. It was just a label. Seeing it written with such care made it feel real for the first time. "It probably isn't much," Mrs. Gable added, a note of preemptive disappointment in her voice. Don't get your hopes up, Leo. People make promises, they forget, or they pass on. In my experience, these things usually just lead to more questions than answers. She was managing my expectations, the same way she'd taught us all to manage our lives. Aim low and you'll never be disappointed. Don't hope for anything and you'll never have it taken away. It was the unofficial motto of Blackwood. I slipped the letter into the inside pocket of my thin jacket, the corner of the envelope pressing against my ribs. It felt both like a promise and a threat. I stood up, hoisting the cardboard box. It was awkward and heavy, a clumsy summary of a life I was desperate to leave behind. "Good luck, Leo," Mrs. Gable said, not unkindly. She didn't stand up. She was already moving on to the next file, the next child who would one day sit in this same chair. I was processed, finished. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing to say goodbye to. I walked out of her office, down the long, echoing hallway, polished to a sterile shine, and pushed open the heavy front doors. The autumn air was sharp and cold, and it bit at my cheeks. I walked toward the gate, the one that had defined the boundaries of my world for a decade. When the buzzer sounded one last time, I didn't look back. I stepped through, and for the first time in my life, there was no one on the other side telling me where to go. The bus stop was a block away, the city was 4 hours south, and in my pocket was a letter from a ghost, from a place I'd never been. Mrs. Gable was right, it probably wasn't much, but as I stood on that lonely sidewalk with the gray sky pressing down, it was the only thing I had that felt like it might be mine. It was the only direction I had, even if it was a direction into the past. The bus smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, a scent so familiar it almost felt like home. I found a seat by a grimy window and watched the manicured lawns of the suburbs give way to the endless flat expanse of farmland. The cardboard box sat on the seat next to me, a silent, clumsy companion. I didn't want to open the letter here, surrounded by the quiet snores of strangers and the drone of the engine. I wanted to give it a space to breathe, to be what it was, even if that was nothing. But the weight of it in my pocket was a constant physical presence. A question mark pressed against my skin. Hours passed. The sky darkened and the rhythmic thump of the wheels on the asphalt became a hypnotic lullaby. I thought about what Mrs. Gable had said. Don't get your hopes up. It was good advice. Hope was a dangerous thing in a place like Blackwood. It was a crack in your armor, a weakness that could be exploited. The kids who hoped for a foster family, for a letter that never came, for a parent to sober up and come back for them, they were the ones who broke the hardest. I had learned early on to live without it, to exist in the now, to focus on getting through the day, the week, the year, to expect nothing. But this letter, this was different. It wasn't a hope for the future. It was a fact from the past. Someone 10 years ago had known this day would come. They had thought of me. Finally, we pulled into the sprawling, chaotic mess of the Port Authority bus terminal in the city. The hiss of the air brakes was a signal. My old life was officially over. I grabbed my box and shuffled out into the cold night air, the noise and the lights an immediate assault on my senses. I was supposed to find Mr. Evans, the social worker, but the terminal was a sea of anonymous hurrying faces. I felt a surge of panic, a feeling of being utterly, terrifyingly small. I found a relatively quiet corner near a bank of lockers and sat down on my box. My hands were trembling as I pulled the envelope from my pocket. It was time. Whatever was inside, it was better to know. I carefully tore open the seal, my fingers fumbling with the delicate, aged paper. Inside was a single folded sheet and a small, tarnished brass key, heavy and ornate. It looked like something from another century. I unfolded the letter. The same elegant, spidery handwriting covered the page. "My dearest Leo," it began. The words hit me with a physical force. My dearest Leo. No one had ever called me that. I had been Leo or Vance or Kid, never dearest. I had to read it again, just to be sure. If you are reading this, then it means you are 18. It means you are a man, and it means I am likely gone. I am so sorry, my boy. I am sorry for more things than I can ever write on this single piece of paper. I hope you were safe. I hope you were cared for. I prayed for it every single night. My name is Elara Vance, and I am your grandmother. I know you won't remember me. You were so small when I had to let you go. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, and I want you to know with every fiber of your being that it was not because I didn't love you. I loved you more than the sunrise. I did it because I had to protect you. Things happened, things I couldn't control, after your parents, after the accident. I was not well, and there were people, bad people, who wanted what our family had. They saw a grieving old woman and a little boy as an easy mark. Leaving was the only way to keep you off their map. I made myself a ghost so that you could have a chance to grow up. My eyes were blurring with tears. I wiped them away, angrily. Grandmother, I had a grandmother. I remembered a faint whisper of a memory, a woman with kind, wrinkled eyes and a smell of cinnamon and soil. It was a ghost of a feeling, nothing more. The official story was that my parents had died in a car crash, and I had no other living relatives. It was a lie. All of it. The letter continued. I couldn't leave you much, my boy. Money was a dangerous trail to leave. But I could leave you the one thing they could never take. I left you home. The key in this envelope is for the cabin. It's on the family land, just outside of Havenwood. It's not much. It's old, and it will need work, but it is yours. The deed is in your name, held in trust by a local lawyer until your 18th birthday. Her name is Sarah Albright. She's a good woman. Her father was my friend. Go there, Leo. It's a long way from the city, a long way from everything, but it's where you come from. The land holds our stories. It holds your history. There is a metal box under the loose floorboard by the hearth. What's inside will explain more. Be careful. Trust your gut. The world is not a kind place, but you have Vance blood in you. We are survivors. I love you, my Leo. I have loved you every day. Live a good life. Be happy. That is all I have ever wanted for you. Your grandmother, Elara. I sat there for a long time, the letter shaking in my hand, the heavy key cold in my palm. My mind was reeling. A grandmother, a home, a history, a warning. Everything I thought I knew about myself, my entire foundation of being an unwanted orphan, a piece of state property, had just crumbled into dust. It was replaced by something terrifying and beautiful and overwhelmingly real. I had a family. I had a story. I looked at the bus ticket to the shelter in my other hand. It felt like a ticket to another kind of prison. Then I looked at the key. It was a ticket to an unknown world, a life I was supposed to have. Mrs. Gable's voice echoed in my head. Don't get your hopes up. But it was too late. Hope, fierce and terrifying, was flooding into the hollow spaces inside me. I stood up, leaving the box of my old life sitting on the floor of the bus terminal. I walked over to the ticket counter, the key clutched in my fist. I need a ticket to Havenwood, I said to the tired-looking man behind the glass. He squinted at his screen. Havenwood. Kid, there's nothing in Havenwood. The bus only passes through there once a day, early morning. It's a ghost town. I know, I said, my voice clearer and stronger than it had ever been. That's where I'm going. It was a long way from everything. It was home. The journey north was the opposite of the journey south. Instead of moving toward the noise and the chaos, I was moving toward silence. The bus was old and mostly empty, rattling its way through sleeping towns and dark forests. With every mile, I felt like I was shedding a layer of my old skin. The institutional gray of Blackwood was being replaced by the deep blues and blacks of the rural night. I held the key in my pocket, turning it over and over with my thumb, the metal worn smooth from a use I couldn't imagine. I read my grandmother's letter again and again until I had it memorized. Each word was a piece of a puzzle. I did it to protect you, bad people. They wanted what our family had. It wasn't just a story of abandonment and loss anymore. It was a mystery, and I was walking right into the middle of it. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overshadowed by a new feeling, purpose. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just being moved from one place to another by a system. I was choosing my destination. The sun was just beginning to cast a pale, watery light over the horizon when the bus driver called out, "Havenwood! Next stop, Havenwood!" I looked out the window. There was no town in sight, just a dense wall of pine trees and a narrow two-lane road stretching into the mist. The bus slowed and pulled over at a lonely-looking crossroads, marked by a single faded sign. A small, weathered lean-to served as the bus stop. That was it. That was Havenwood's welcome. "This is you, kid," the driver said, looking at me in the rear-view mirror with a mixture of pity and curiosity. "You sure you know where you're going?" "I think so," I said, grabbing my small backpack, which now contained the only things I'd kept: the book, the smooth stone, and the letter. The bus doors hissed open, and I stepped out into the biting morning air. It was sharp and clean, filled with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. It was so different from the city's smog and the sterile air of the home. The bus pulled away with a groan, its red taillights disappearing into the fog, leaving me in an almost absolute silence. It wasn't an empty silence, it was a living one, filled with the rustle of unseen things in the woods and the whisper of the wind through the tall trees. The sign read, "Havenwood, population 214. It looked like it had been painted decades ago. According to the map on my phone, which barely had a signal, the town itself was another mile down the main road. The address from the lawyer's office, which I'd looked up online, was on a place called Whisper Creek Road. It wasn't on the map. I started walking toward the town, my breath pluming in the cold. Havenwood felt like a place that was actively trying to be forgotten. The handful of buildings that made up its main street were old, their paint peeling, their windows dark. There was a general store with a flickering neon sign, a dusty-looking diner, a post office, and not much else. A few pickup trucks were parked haphazardly, coated in a layer of dirt. It was a world away from the life I knew. I stepped into the general store. The bell above the door chimed, a cheerful sound in the sleepy quiet. An old man with a thick white beard sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper. He looked up at me over his glasses, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Morning," he grunted. "Morning," I replied. "I'm looking for Whisper Creek Road. My phone can't find it." He folded his newspaper slowly and set it aside. "That's because it ain't a county road. It's an old logging trail. Runs off the north end of town past the old mill. What's a kid like you looking for way out there? Nothing on that road but the old Vance place. Been empty for a decade." My heart hammered in my chest. "That's it. That's where I'm going." The man's eyebrows shot up. He studied my face, his gaze lingering. "Vance, you say? You must be Alara's boy, her grandson." It wasn't a question. I was stunned. "You knew her?" "Knew her? Hell, everyone knew Alara," he said, a sad smile touching his lips. "She was the heart of this town before she got sick, tough as an old oak. We all wondered what happened to you. She just left one day. Said she was going to get treatment and never came back. Left the house and everything in it." He shook his head. "So you're back to claim it?" "Something like that," I said, not wanting to reveal everything to a stranger. He gave me a long, thoughtful look. "Well, it's a good 2-mile walk. Head north past the church, you'll see the turnoff. It's not marked, just a dirt track heading into the woods. The cabin's at the very end of it." He paused, then added in a lower voice, "You be careful out there, son. That land, it's got history. Not all of it good." The warning echoed my grandmother's letter. I thanked him, bought a bottle of water and a bag of jerky, and headed out. The walk was longer than I expected. The paved road gave way to a rutted dirt track, just as the man had said. The trees pressed in on either side, their branches interlocking overhead, creating a green, shadowed tunnel. The silence was deeper here. I was completely alone. After what felt like an eternity, the track opened into a clearing, and there it was. The cabin was small and simple, built of dark, weathered logs. Its roof sagged in the middle, and a stone chimney listed to one side, covered in moss. The windows were dark and vacant, like sleeping eyes. A large, overgrown field stretched out behind it, bordered by a collapsing wooden fence. Further back, I could just make out the shape of a large barn, its roof caved in on one side. The place didn't look abandoned. It looked like it was grieving. It was a mess. It was run down, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I walked up the creaking wooden steps of the porch. A faded, hand-carved sign hung crookedly next to the door. It just said, Vance, my name. I pulled the heavy brass key from my pocket. It felt ancient and important. I slid it into the lock. It was stiff, and I had to jiggle it, but then I felt the tumblers give way with a satisfying, solid click. I pushed the door open. A wave of air, thick with the scent of dust, old wood, and something else, something faint and floral, like dried lavender, washed over me. Sunlight streamed through the grimy windows, illuminating swirling dust motes in the air. The inside was a single large room. A stone fireplace, the hearth cold and black, dominated one wall. Simple, sturdy wooden furniture, a table, a few chairs, a bed frame in the corner, was draped in white cloths, like ghosts waiting for a family to return. It was frozen in time. A cup sat on the draining board by the sink. A book lay open on a small bedside table. It was as if someone had just stepped out for a moment and never come back. My grandmother. I walked toward the fireplace, my boots echoing on the wooden floorboards. The loose floorboard by the hearth. I knelt down, running my hands over the wide planks. Most were solid, nailed down tight, but one, right at the corner of the stone hearth, shifted slightly under my weight. I pried at the edge with my fingers. It was stuck fast. I went back outside and found a rusted tire iron near a pile of old firewood. Using it as a lever, I managed to pry the board up. It came away with a groan of old nails. And there, nestled in the dark, spider-webbed space beneath the floor, was a black metal box. It was an old military-style ammunition can, heavy and solid. It wasn't locked, just secured with a simple latch. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was it, the next piece of the story. I lifted the box out. It was heavier than it looked. I set it on the dusty table and took a deep breath before I unfastened the latch. The lid opened with a metallic squeak. Inside, cushioned by yellowed newspaper, were three things. The first was a thick stack of cash, bundled in paper bands. I couldn't even guess how much was there. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. The second was a sheaf of legal documents tied with a ribbon, the deed to the property, a title, and a birth certificate. My birth certificate. And there, on top of it all, was another letter in the same familiar handwriting. I picked it up, my hands trembling. This one felt different, heavier, more serious. My Leo, it began, if you found this, then you made it home. I knew you would. You have your father's strength. I'm going to tell you the truth now, all of it. And it's not easy to hear. Your parents, my son, and his beautiful wife, they didn't die in a simple car accident. It wasn't rain on a slick road. It was murder. It was quiet, and it was clever, and it was made to look like anything but what it was. And it was because of this land. This land, our land, has been in the Vance family for generations. We never had much, but we had this. We were poor dirt farmers. But your grandfather, he was a dreamer. He was always prospecting, always looking for something more. And one day, he found it. He found a deep, pure aquifer under our property. In a state that's getting drier every year, water is worth more than gold. He knew it. And he made the mistake of telling the wrong people. A company, a big development corporation called Viridian Holdings, wanted it. They came with offers, lowball figures that were insulting. When we refused, they got persuasive. They started with legal threats, trying to claim easements, trying to bankrupt us with lawyers. Your father fought them. He was smart and he was stubborn. He was going to expose them. And for that, they ran him off the road one night. They thought I would be next, a broken old woman. They thought I would crumble, take their money, and disappear. And I almost did. I almost let the grief swallow me whole. But then I looked at you, a tiny, perfect little boy sleeping in your crib, and I knew I couldn't give up. But I couldn't fight them either, not then. They had money and power, and I had nothing. So I did the only thing I could think of to protect you. I disappeared you. I took you to the city. I left you at the home with a fake story. No family, no history. I erased you from my life so they could never find you, never use you against me. I let the world think I was a grandmother who abandoned her only kin. I let this town think I had run away from my grief. I sacrificed my name, my honor, everything just to keep you safe. The money in this box is everything I saved. Every penny I scraped together working odd jobs after I left. It's not a fortune, but it's a start. It's yours. Don't hate me, Leo. Please try to understand. Every day for 10 years has been a torment, but I would do it all again to know that you are alive and free. Now you have a choice. You can take the money and run, disappear. Build a new life far away from here. No one would blame you, or you can stay. You can fight. The land is yours now. Viridian still wants it. They will come for it. They will come for you. The choice is yours. Whatever you do, know that you were loved. You are loved. I dropped the letter onto the table. My legs gave out from under me and I sank into one of the dusty chairs. The room tilted. Murder. My parents were murdered. My entire life, my identity as an orphan, was a carefully constructed lie, a shield. My grandmother hadn't abandoned me. She had sacrificed everything for me. The weight of that knowledge, the sheer scale of her love and her pain, was crushing. I looked at the stack of cash. It wasn't a gift. It was a weapon. It was a shield. It was an escape route. I looked at the deed. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a legacy. It was a battlefield. Tears streamed down my face, silent and hot. I cried for the parents I never knew. I cried for the grandmother whose love I had never been able to feel. I cried for the little boy who grew up believing he was worthless, that he'd been thrown away. And I cried for the young man sitting in a dusty, silent cabin, holding the entire shattering weight of his past in his hands. The silence of the cabin was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with unanswered questions and the echoes of a tragedy I was now a part of. The choice wasn't just about land or money. It was about who I was going to be. Was I the scared orphan, Leo number 734, who ran from trouble? Or was I Leo Vance, Elara's grandson, and was I going to stand my ground? I didn't have an answer. I just sat there as the sun crept across the floor, feeling the ghost of my grandmother's love and the cold shadow of the enemy she had tried so hard to hide me from. Listen, if you've made it this far, maybe you know what this feels like. Maybe not the specifics, not the cabin and the hidden money, but the feeling of being told a story about your life, about who you are, and then one day discovering it was all a lie. The ground just falls out from under you. It's a kind of grief for a life you never even knew you lost. And you're left standing in the rubble, having to decide which pieces to pick up and which to leave behind. It's a heavy, lonely place to be. If you're in that place right now, or you've ever been there, I want you to know you're not alone. The people in this community, the ones who watch these stories, we get it. So take a second, breathe, and know that your story matters too. Now, let's get back to what happened in that cabin. For a day, maybe two, I did nothing. I drifted through the cabin like a ghost myself, touching the furniture, running my hands along the rough-hewn log walls. I drank water from the old hand pump at the sink, the water tasting clean and cold and metallic. I ate the jerky I'd bought and explored the small pantry, finding dusty cans of beans and soup, left behind by my grandmother like emergency rations for a future she could only hope for. I slept on the bed in the corner, not even bothering to take the sheet off, wrapped in my jacket against the deep, penetrating cold of the nights. The money stayed in the box. The letter sat on the table where I'd dropped it. I couldn't bring myself to touch either of them. They felt radioactive, humming with the energy of my family's pain. My grief was a raw, physical thing. It was a hollow ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. Every corner of the cabin seemed to hold a memory I didn't have. I imagined my father as a boy carving his initials into the porch railing. I imagined my mother arranging wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill. I imagined my grandmother at the hearth, her face illuminated by the fire, praying for a grandson she had to send away. The land itself felt like a living entity. I walked the overgrown field, the tall, dry grass whispering against my legs. I stood at the edge of the woods, the massive pine and oak trees standing like silent sentinels guarding the property. I looked at the crumbling barn, a skeleton of a building, and felt a pull toward it, though I didn't know why. It all felt like mine, a connection that ran deeper than any legal document. This was my blood-soaked inheritance. On the third day, I woke up with a new feeling settling over the grief. It was a slow, burning anger at Viridian Holdings, anger at the faceless, greedy people who had shattered my family and built my life on a foundation of lies. They had taken everything, my parents, my grandmother, my childhood, and they thought they had gotten away with it. They thought the story was over. My grandmother had given me a choice, run or fight. And as I stood there in the cold morning light, looking at the name Vance on the door, I realized there was no choice at all. Running would mean they had won. It would mean my grandmother's sacrifice, her decade of lonely suffering, was for nothing. It would mean my parents' memory would be buried under a parking lot or a luxury condo development. I couldn't let that happen. The anger gave me clarity. I opened the metal box again. I took out the money and counted it. It was just over $20,000. A fortune to me, but I knew it was nothing against a corporation. It wouldn't win a legal battle, but it would keep me alive while I figured out my next move. Then I looked at the papers. The deed was there, officially filed with the county. And there was a business card clipped to it for Albright and Son, attorneys at law, with Sarah Albright's name circled. I had a name, I had a starting point. My phone still had almost no service at the cabin, so I walked the 2 miles back into town. The general store owner, whose name I learned was Hank, gave me a nod as I passed. This time, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt like I was walking on my own turf. I found the lawyer's office. It was a small, unassuming brick building on Main Street. The gold lettering on the window faded and peeling. It looked as old as the town itself. Taking a deep breath, I walked inside. The office was quiet, smelling of old paper and furniture polish. A young woman at the front desk looked up. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Sarah Albright," I said. "My name is Leo Vance." The name got a reaction. Her eyes widened slightly. One moment, she disappeared through a door, and a minute later, a woman in her late 50s emerged. She was tall and slim, with sharp, intelligent eyes and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore a no-nonsense expression, but her eyes held a spark of warmth. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice calm and steady. "I've been expecting you, for about 10 years, in fact. Please, come in." She led me into her office, which was lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with thick, leather-bound legal volumes. She gestured for me to sit, and she took her place behind a large oak desk. "Your grandmother set up a trust," she began, getting straight to the point. "The property transferred to you automatically on your 18th birthday. I am the executor. I've been paying the property taxes out of an account she funded, waiting for you to show up." She paused, studying me. "You look like your father." The simple statement hit me like a punch to the gut. I don't remember him," I managed to say. Her expression softened. "I do. He was a good man, stubborn as they come, but good. Your grandmother was one of my father's dearest friends. I've known her my whole life." She leaned forward slightly. "Leo, I know this must be overwhelming. Alara left a letter for me as well, to be opened when you arrived. It gave me some context. Not everything, but enough. She told me you would have a choice to make." "I've made it," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "I'm not selling. I'm staying." A slow smile spread across Sarah Albright's face. "I was hoping you'd say that. Ilara would be proud." Her smile faded. "But you need to understand what you're up against. Viridian Holdings hasn't gone away. They've been sending letters to this office twice a year for the last decade, offering to buy the property. Their offers have gotten more aggressive lately. They know the trust was about to expire. As if on cue, a car pulled up outside the office. It was a sleek black sedan that looked completely out of place in the dusty little town. A man in a sharp, expensive suit got out. "Speak of the devil," Sarah muttered under her breath. "That's Mr. Davies. He's their regional acquisitions manager. He's been the one applying the pressure." A moment later, the man walked in, all polished shoes and predatory confidence. He nodded curtly at the receptionist and walked straight into Sarah's office without knocking. "All bright," he said, his voice smooth and cold. "I was in the area. I trust the paperwork for the Vance transfer has been processed. We're prepared to make a final, generous offer to the new owner to avoid any further complications." He then seemed to notice me for the first time, dismissing me with a quick glance as if I were a piece of furniture. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Davies, this is Leo Vance, the new owner." Davies's perfectly composed expression flickered for a fraction of a second. He recovered quickly, turning to me and extending a hand. "Mr. Vance, a pleasure. I'm Jonathan Davies with Viridian. I'm sorry for your family's loss. Your grandmother was a difficult woman to negotiate with. We're hoping you'll be more pragmatic." I didn't take his hand. I just looked at him, my anger a cold, hard stone in my stomach. This was one of them, one of the people who had destroyed my life before it even began. "The land's not for sale," I said. Davies's smile was thin and humorless. "I think you'll reconsider. Let's not be sentimental. It's a run-down cabin on a worthless piece of scrubland. Our offer is more than fair. It's a chance for a young man like you to have a fresh start, a significant amount of money." "It's not for sale," I repeated, my voice low and steady. His eyes hardened. "Mr. Vance, perhaps you're not aware of the situation. Viridian owns significant mineral and water access rights on all adjacent parcels. We also have a registered easement across your property for access. We can make your life there very difficult. We can tie you up in court for years. By the time we're done, you'll be bankrupt, and we'll get the land for pennies on the dollar at auction. Or you can take our offer today, walk away with $500,000, and this all goes away." It was a threat, delivered with the casual arrogance of someone who had never lost. $500,000. The number hung in the air, a tempting, poisonous cloud. It was more money than I could ever have dreamed of. It was an easy way out. It was exactly what he expected me to take. I looked at Sarah. She was watching me, her expression unreadable but supportive. Then I thought of my grandmother's letter. "You have Vance blood in you. We are survivors." I turned back to Davies. "The answer is no. Now get out of my lawyer's office." For the first time, Davies looked genuinely surprised. His face flushed with anger. "You're making a big mistake, kid," he hissed. "I don't think so," Sarah said, standing up. Her voice was pure ice. "You heard him, Jonathan. This meeting is over. Any future communication will be in writing, addressed to me. Now, as Mr. Vance said, get out." Davies stared at me for a long moment, his eyes promising a world of trouble. Then he turned on his heel and stormed out of the office. The black sedan sped away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. The silence he left behind was heavy. "Well," Sarah said, sitting back down and letting out a long breath, "that was definitive." She looked at me, a new respect in her eyes. "They're not going to give up, you know. They'll do exactly what he said. They'll try to break you." "Let them try," I said. The fear was still there, but the anger and the purpose were stronger. I wasn't just defending a piece of land. I was defending my family. I was reclaiming my story. "Good," she said with a firm nod, "because I don't think that land is worthless at all. Your grandmother was a fighter. She wouldn't have gone to all this trouble just for a piece of scrubland. There's something more here. Something she was protecting. We just have to find out what it is." I thought of the crumbling barn, the way it seemed to call to me. I thought of my grandmother's words. The land holds our stories. The first letter had led me to the box under the floor. Maybe there was more. Maybe the next answer wasn't in a box, but in the land itself. The barn, I said, thinking aloud. There's an old barn on the property. Sarah's eyes lit up with interest. Your grandfather spent most of his time out there. It was his workshop, his sanctuary. If he kept records of anything, that's where they'd be. Leaving Sarah's office, I felt a sense of resolve I'd never known. The confrontation with Davies hadn't scared me off. It had solidified my purpose. They saw me as a kid they could bully, a loose end they could easily tie up with a check. They had no idea who they were dealing with because I was only just starting to figure that out myself. I was the grandson of Alara and Arthur Vance, and this was my home. I walked back to the cabin not with the aimless drift of the past few days, but with a mission. The barn, which had looked like a symbol of decay, now seemed like a vault, a place of secrets. It stood at the far end of the property, its back to the dense forest. The path to it was almost completely overgrown, and I had to push my way through thorny bushes and tall weeds that snagged at my clothes. The barn was even larger up close than it had appeared from the cabin. It was a classic gambrel-roofed structure, its red paint faded to a pale, rusty pink, peeling off in large flakes. The main doors, wide enough to drive a tractor through, were hanging off their hinges, and one side of the roof had indeed collapsed, leaving a gaping hole open to the sky. It looked dangerous, but I didn't care. I squeezed through a gap in the doors and stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of hay, rust, and damp earth. Shafts of light cut through the holes in the roof, illuminating a cavernous space filled with ghosts of a life I'd never seen. An old rusted tractor sat in one corner, covered in a thick blanket of dust and cobwebs. Stalls for animals I couldn't name lined one wall. Old tools, saws, hammers, wrenches hung from the walls, coated in a fine red dust. It was a cathedral of forgotten work. My grandfather's workshop, Sarah had said. I looked for a space that seemed different from the rest of the barn. In the back corner, under the most intact section of the roof, was a partitioned-off area. A small, sturdy workbench stood against the wall, and above it, shelves were filled with jars of screws, nails, and unidentifiable metal parts. This was it. This was his space. I ran my hands over the workbench, the wood scarred and stained from decades of use. I pulled open the drawers. They were filled with more tools, schematics for engines, and old farming almanacs. Nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. I felt a pang of disappointment. Maybe there was nothing here. Maybe this was just a dead end. But my grandmother's words echoed in my mind. Be careful. Trust your gut. My gut told me I was in the right place. I started to search more methodically. I tapped on the walls, listening for a hollow sound. I checked under the workbench. I ran my hands along the dusty floorboards. Nothing. Frustrated, I leaned against a stack of old wooden crates by the wall. One of them shifted under my weight, and I heard a clink of glass from inside. Curious, I pulled the top crate off the stack. They were heavy, filled with old canning jars. I moved the next one, and the next. The last crate, at the very bottom of the stack, was different. It wasn't a crate at all. It was a wooden chest bound with iron straps, and it was locked. There was no key. I looked around the workshop for something to pry it open with. A crowbar was resting against the wall. It took a few tries, the old wood groaning in protest, but finally, with a loud crack, the lock splintered and the lid of the chest popped open. My heart pounded. Inside, it wasn't gold or treasure. It was something far more valuable. It was filled with journals, dozens of them. They were simple, black, hardcover notebooks, each labeled with a year. I picked up the top one. The label read 1995. I opened it. The handwriting was completely different from my grandmother's. It was a man's script, strong, angular, and precise. My grandfather's. I sat down on the dusty floor of the barn, the shafts of light my only illumination, and I began to read. I started with the most recent journals from the years just before my parents died. At first, they were just what you'd expect. Notes on crop rotation, repairs to the tractor, observations about the weather, the quiet, methodical record of a farmer's life. But then the entries started to change. He began to write about his project. He wrote about drilling, about taking water samples, about geological surveys he'd paid for with his meager savings. He was convinced there was something special beneath our land. "Alara thinks I'm a fool," one entry read. "Chasing ghosts," she says. "But I know I'm close. The divining rod never lies, and the samples from the deep well are the purest I've ever seen. This could change everything for us, for our boy, for his future family." My breath caught in my throat. He was doing this for them, for me. Then came the entry I was dreading and searching for. He mentioned a name, Viridian Holdings. "A man from a company called Viridian came to see me today. Drove a fancy car that looked ridiculous on our dirt road. He knew. I don't know how, but he knew about the water. He offered to buy the land. The offer was an insult. I told him to get lost. He smiled when I said it, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Said we'd be talking again." The entries over the next few months became a chronicle of a war. He documented every letter from Viridian's lawyers, every threatening phone call, every strange car that drove slowly past their property. He wrote about his arguments with my father, who wanted to go to the press to expose them. My grandfather was more cautious. He knew how dangerous these people were. "My son is brave," he wrote, "braver than I am. He wants to fight them in the light. I'm afraid of what happens in the shadows. These men don't play by the rules. They don't want a fair fight. They just want to win." I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking. I felt like I was living their last months with them, feeling their hope and their rising fear. And then I found the last entry. It was dated the day before the accident. "Davies, the snake from Viridian, came by again today. Unannounced. He brought a new offer, and it wasn't about money this time. It was a threat. He talked about my son. He talked about my daughter-in-law. He mentioned the road she takes home from her job at the library every night. He didn't have to say what he meant. I saw it in his eyes. I told him to go to hell. After he left, I told my boy we had to be careful. He just got angry, said he was done being scared. He said he had a source, a whistleblower inside Viridian, and he was meeting them tomorrow. He was going to end this. I'm so proud of him, and I am so afraid." The journal ended there. The next page was blank. I closed the book, a cold, sickening dread washing over me. It wasn't a random intimidation tactic gone wrong. It was a targeted assassination. They had killed my father to stop him from meeting that whistleblower. They had killed my mother because she was with him, and my grandfather knew it. He must have lived with that crushing guilt, that knowledge that his discovery had led to his son's death. And my grandmother, she had lived with it too. This was the secret she couldn't write in her first letter. This was the truth that was too terrible, the one she had to bury. But she hadn't buried it completely. She had left it for me to find. This wasn't just a collection of old journals. This was evidence. This was a record. This was the weapon my father never got to use. I carefully packed all the journals back into the chest. It was heavy, but I managed to drag it out of the barn and all the way back to the cabin. I sat at the table, the journals spread out before me, the weight of their words filling the small room. The choice my grandmother had given me was now clearer than ever, and the stakes were infinitely higher. Davies had offered me $500,000 to walk away. It was hush money. They weren't just trying to buy a piece of land with good water rights. They were trying to buy my silence. They were trying to bury their crime for good. If I used these journals, if I took them to Sarah Albright, I wouldn't just be starting a legal fight over property. I would be accusing a powerful corporation of a double murder. They wouldn't just try to bankrupt me. They would see me as a threat that needed to be eliminated, just like my father. The fear was real now. It was a living thing in the room with me. I thought about the money in the metal box. I could take it, take the journals, and just disappear. I could move to the other side of the country, change my name, and live a quiet, safe life. It was the sensible thing to do. It was what my grandmother had done for me. She had chosen safety, but she had also left me these journals. She had left me the choice. She had trusted me to make it. I looked around the cabin at the ghostly outlines of a life I'd never had. I thought of the young, brave father who was going to expose the truth. I thought of the grandfather who had died with the weight of that truth on his shoulders. I thought of the grandmother who had given up everything to give me a future. Their story wasn't over. It was living and breathing in me, and I was the only one left who could give them a voice. Running wasn't an option, not anymore. I wasn't Leo number 734 anymore. I wasn't just a survivor, I was a Vance. And we didn't run, we fought. I would take the journals to Sarah. I would tell her everything. I would finish the fight my father started, whatever the cost. The next morning, I walked back into Sarah Albright's office, this time carrying one of the journals. I didn't want to bring all of them, not yet. It felt safer to keep them hidden. Sarah saw the look on my face and knew instantly that something had changed. She led me back to her office and closed the door. "You found something," she said. I placed the journal on her desk, the last one, the one that chronicled the final, terrifying months. My grandfather kept records of everything. I watched her as she read. I saw her professional composure slowly crumble, replaced by a look of horrified understanding. She read his account of Davy's threats, of my father's plan to meet a whistleblower. When she finished, she closed the book gently and looked at me, her eyes filled with a new, somber light. "I knew it," she whispered. I always suspected it wasn't an accident. Your father, he was so careful, but I never had anything to go on. This," she tapped the cover of the journal, "this changes everything, Leo. This isn't just a property dispute anymore." "I know," I said. "What do we do?" "We move carefully," she said, her mind already working, the sharp, pragmatic lawyer taking over again. "These journals are powerful, but on their own, a good corporate lawyer could dismiss them as the ramblings of a grieving old man. We need more. We need to find out who your father was going to meet. That whistleblower." It seemed like an impossible task. We were talking about a secret meeting that was supposed to happen over a decade ago. The person could be anywhere. They could be dead. "How do we even start?" I asked, feeling a wave of hopelessness. "We start with your father's things," she said. "Alara left everything as it was. Did you find any of his personal effects in the cabin?" I shook my head. "It feels like it was just my grandmother's place." "That's because your parents had their own small house on the property, closer to the main road. Alara couldn't bear to go in it after they died. She just locked it up. As far as I know, no one has set foot in there since the day of the funeral." Another place, another set of secrets. It felt like my family's history was a series of locked rooms I was now being given the keys to. "We need to go there," Sarah said, standing up. "Now." We drove to my property in her sensible sedan, a far cry from the menacing black car Davies drove. She pulled up short of the main cabin, parking near a barely visible overgrown path that forked off the main track. "This is it," she said. The walk was short. Through a thicket of young trees that had grown up in the last decade, we saw it. It was a small, modest bungalow, much newer than the main cabin, but in far worse shape. The porch was collapsing, and vines snaked their way up the walls, pulling at the siding. It was a place that had been swallowed by time and grief. Sarah had the key. It was on a ring with other keys related to the estate. It took her a moment to find the right one. The lock was rusted solid. It took both of us pushing against the door to get it to budge, and it finally swung open with a heart-wrenching screech of protest. The air that rolled out was stale and thick, the smell of a place sealed for a very long time. It was dark inside, the windows covered in a decade's worth of grime. Sarah found a light switch, but when she flicked it, nothing happened. The power had been cut long ago. We used the flashlights on our phones. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing a scene of domestic life, abruptly halted. A coffee cup on the table, a newspaper folded on a chair. It was a time capsule of my parents' last morning. In the small living room, there was a desk piled with papers. It was my father's. We spent the next hour going through everything. Most of it was normal: bills, bank statements, work documents from his job as a surveyor. But then, tucked into a folder labeled Viridian, we found it. It was a single sheet of paper with a handwritten note. It said, "Meet J. Miller, the Black Creek Diner, 7 p.m. He has everything." And a date, the date of the accident. "J. Miller," Sarah read aloud. "That's our whistleblower." We now had a name. It felt like a monumental victory. But the name was a common one, and the trail was a decade old. Back in her office, Sarah started digging. She searched old public records, voter registrations, anything that might give us a clue. After hours of searching, she found a match. A James Miller who had worked for Viridian Holdings as a geologist during that time. And according to the records, he had quit his job the day after my parents' deaths. "He ran," I said. "He got scared, and he ran." "You can't blame him," Sarah said softly. "He knew what they were capable of." The trail went cold after that. There was no forwarding address, no digital footprint we could find. It was as if James Miller had vanished. We had hit another wall. For the next few weeks, life settled into a strange routine. I spent my days at the cabin, working to make it livable. I cleaned out the dust and the cobwebs. I patched the leaky roof with tar I bought in town. I chopped wood for the fireplace. The physical labor was grounding. With every swing of the axe, with every nail I hammered, I felt like I was not just fixing a house, but rebuilding my own life. I was putting down roots in the soil my family had died for. The community, small as it was, began to accept me. Hank, the store owner, would save me a newspaper every day. An elderly woman who lived down the road, Mrs. Pittry, would sometimes leave a fresh-baked pie on my porch. They didn't ask questions. They just seemed to understand, in that quiet, rural way, that I belonged here. They were Alara's grandson. That was enough. But the threat of Viridian was always there, a shadow at the edge of my new life. A letter arrived from their lawyers, a formal notice of intent to sue for access to their easement, filled with dense legal jargon designed to intimidate. Sarah handled it, sending back a firm, dismissive response. It was the first shot in a war of attrition. They were trying to bleed me dry, just as Davies had promised. One evening I was sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple when a car came up the long dirt road. It wasn't Sarah's car, and it certainly wasn't a sleek black sedan. It was an old, beaten-up pickup truck that looked like it had been through a war. It rattled to a stop in front of the cabin, and a man got out. He was older, probably in his 60s, with a weathered face, tired eyes, and the cautious posture of someone who had spent a long time looking over his shoulder. He just stood there for a moment, looking at the cabin, at me. "Can I help you?" I asked, standing up slowly. "Are you Leo Vance?" he asked, his voice rough, like gravel. "I am." He took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the property, the woods, as if checking for threats. "My name is James Miller," he said. I think you and I have something to talk about." It felt like the world stopped. James Miller. He was here. The ghost we'd been chasing had just appeared on my doorstep. "How did you find me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I've been keeping an eye on this place," he said, his gaze finally settling on me. "From a distance. For years. I saw in the county paper that the property had transferred out of the trust. I knew Alara's grandson had finally come home. I had to see. I had to know if you were going to fight them." He paused, his expression a mixture of fear and resolve. "Your father was a good man, kid. He was a hero. He died trying to do the right thing. I ran. I've been living with that shame every day for 10 years. "What do you have?" I asked, my heart hammering. "Everything," he said. "The geological reports they buried, the internal memos, the proof that they knew the accident was no accident. I've kept it all. I was just too scared to use it." He looked me straight in the eye. "But I'm not scared anymore. Seeing you here, seeing you stand your ground, it's time to finish what your father started. Together, this was it. The final piece of the puzzle. The journals gave us the story. James Miller gave us the proof. We finally had a real weapon. The fight that followed wasn't a dramatic single courtroom showdown. It was a slow, grueling war fought in depositions, legal filings, and closed-door meetings. Sarah was brilliant. She used the journals and Miller's evidence not to pursue a criminal case, which would have been nearly impossible to prove after so many years, but as leverage in a massive civil suit. We sued Viridian for wrongful death, for conspiracy, for a decade of harassment. Davies and his team of slick lawyers tried to bury us in paperwork. They tried to paint my father as a disgruntled employee, my grandfather as a senile old man, and Miller as an unreliable liar. But the evidence was too strong. The journals in my grandfather's meticulous hand were undeniable. Miller's documents, which he had carefully preserved, corroborated every claim. The story was airtight. The local press got wind of it, and then the regional papers. The story of the big, bad corporation trying to steal a murdered family's land from the orphaned heir was a powerful one. Viridian's stock price began to tremble. They were facing a public relations nightmare. Finally, they folded. They didn't want this going to a public trial. They didn't want my grandfather's journals read in open court. They offered a settlement. It wasn't just a settlement for the land. It was a settlement for my parents' lives. The number was staggering. It was life-changing, generational money. But it came with one condition, a non-disclosure agreement. I would have to agree to never speak publicly about the details of the case, to never tell the full story of what they did. I was in Sarah's office when she laid the offer on the table. My first instinct was to refuse. It felt like blood money, a way for them to silence us, to escape true justice. I wanted them exposed. I wanted the world to know they were murderers. "I know what you're thinking," Sarah said gently. "You want a reckoning. You want them to pay in public for what they did. But Leo, that's not going to happen. The criminal case is too cold. This is the only justice you are likely to get. This settlement will bankrupt them in this region. It will force them to sell off their assets here. It will drive them out of this community for good. You will win. You will have protected your family's land and legacy, and you will have the resources to build any life you want." I thought about it for a long time. I thought about my father, who wanted to bring everything into the light. But I also thought about my grandmother, whose only goal was to see me safe and happy. The fight had never been about revenge for me. It was about honoring their sacrifice. It was about taking back what was stolen. Accepting the settlement wasn't a compromise. It was a strategic victory. It was the end of the war. "Okay," I said, "we accept." Months have passed since then. The settlement money sits in a trust managed by Sarah. Viridian Holdings has vanished from Havenwood. Their signs are gone, their offices closed. We won. I didn't take the money and leave. I used a small portion of it to do what I had already started. I hired local carpenters to help me restore the cabin and the old farmhouse. We rebuilt the barn, making it strong and whole again. The land, once neglected and grieving, is now thriving. I planted a small orchard where the weeds used to grow. This place is my home now. It's not just a piece of property, it's a living monument to my family. Every morning I sit on the porch my grandfather built and drink coffee from a cup like the one my mother left on her table. I feel their presence here, not as ghosts of a tragedy, but as the foundation beneath my feet. I didn't get the life I was supposed to have, but I have built a new one here, on my own terms, from the ruins of the old. Inheritance, I've learned, isn't about the money or the land. It's about the story. It's about the love that's strong enough to cross decades, the sacrifices people make to protect the ones they love. My grandmother gave me more than a key to a cabin. She gave me back my name. She gave me a choice. And she gave me the strength to see it through. And that brings me back to you. We all have a story, and sometimes the story we're told isn't the true one. Sometimes we have to go digging for the truth in the dusty, forgotten corners of our own lives. It's hard work, and it's scary. But finding out who you really are and where you really come from is the only way to build a future that is truly your own. So I want you to do two things for me. First, hit that subscribe button and join this community. We are a place for people with complicated stories, for people who are fighting for their own patch of ground. Second, I want you to go down to the comments and tell me, not the whole story if you don't want to, but just one thing. What is one piece of your own inheritance? A value, a memory, a lesson that you are proud to carry forward? I'll be reading every single one, because every story deserves to be heard, and every one of us deserves a place to call home.